Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So over the last couple of weeks I've been watching the Ford Kavanaugh dumpster fire like everyone else, and I've been meaning to make a video about it, and I've collected a lot of video clips and other bits and pieces, but I just haven't had the opportunity to start it, and every time I even consider starting it, some new allegation comes out or new piece of information or something. So I've continuously put it off, and I may still do a video expressing my thoughts on the whole dumpster fire. But this video is going to be a Ford Kavanaugh related article, but it has a more general scope to it. It's called "Almost No One is Falsely Accused of Rape." Now, technically, I guess that title is correct, because you could argue that almost no one is accused of rape, therefore almost no one is falsely accused of rape. Although I don't think that's what the author means. I think what she means is, out of those people accused of rape, almost no one is falsely accused, which is not exactly accurate. But she makes a good effort to fiddle with figures and distort reality to make it seem like false rape allegations are almost impossible. And when they do happen, there's no consequences whatsoever. Now, just before we get to the article, I should say, even if almost no one is falsely accused of rape, as the heading of this article will have us believe, that doesn't mean that there aren't people who are falsely accused of rape, and that doesn't mean we should throw out due process. I could say almost no one dies in plane crashes, which is true, but we all know plane crashes actually happen and people actually die in them. And we all want our airlines to take precautions to make sure that that number doesn't go up, correct? I would think that's pretty logical. But hey, as we're about to see, there isn't a whole lot of logic in this article. It starts off with, "Much mention has been made recently, mostly by men, of false rape accusations and how frequently they occur." Now that's a good question. How frequently do they occur? Well, that all depends on who you ask, doesn't it? Now, feminists routinely claim that 2 to 8% or sometimes 2 to 10% of rape allegations are false. This is a feminist mantra we hear all the time.
In a previous video, I talked about false rape allegations, and in that video, I specifically mentioned the fact that the vast minority of rape allegations, at most 8%, but as little as 2%, probably closer to 2%, of those allegations turn out to be false.
So now let's look at the reality of the stats here. Researchers estimate that somewhere between 2 and 10% of rape allegations are false. But even among those who are falsely accused, it's rare for men to end up in prison as a result.
So 2% would be 1 in 50. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't say that 1 in 50 is something that almost never happens. If 1 in 50 people who flew on a plane were to die in a plane crash, you wouldn't be saying almost no one dies in a plane crash, would you? And that's the 2% figure. If we look at the 8% figure, then that's 1 in 12. And if we look at the 10% figure, that's 1 in 10. Now that's not almost never happens, is it? And that's, of course, if we accept these figures as accurate, which I don't. The truth is we don't actually know what percentage of rape allegations are false, because most cases, as with the Kavanaugh case, are not proven one way or the other. Now, I do have some interesting stats from the UK. These are government statistics, and we'll be looking at them throughout this article, and they have false allegations at 12%. So that's at the stage of the police investigating. 12% of cases are dropped due to false allegations, which is 1 in 8. But anyway, let's continue. During Brett Kavanaugh's testimony last week, several senators apologised for the damage supposedly inflicted by these claims, which, by affirming their belief in Kavanaugh's denials, they implied were false, on Kavanaugh's life and reputation. Okay, so there's a bit to break down here. First of all, the word supposedly. The whole article is claiming that a false allegation of rape doesn't really affect anyone at all. Doesn't hurt their life, doesn't hurt their reputation, doesn't cause family breakups or stress or loss of income or any of those things. It's just a minor inconvenience. It's like a mosquito bite or something, which I would argue is absolute fucking bullshit.
Today he's been labeled innocent.
10 years ago, Brian Banks was wrongly convicted of raping a classmate while in high school. And on Thursday, the now 26-year-old sobbed as a judge finally threw out the bogus charges that had sent him to prison for more than 5 years.
What went through your mind?
Everything just grabbed me at once, and it just consumed me at that moment. And so it was bittersweet. And I was so happy to hear those words, but just I'm still left with that question of why.
Long Beach Poly says they have it!
At 16, Brian Banks was the star linebacker for his Long Beach high school. He had a full-ride scholarship to USC and had dreamed to play in the NFL.
That scholarship to USC was just waiting for you.
It was there. All I had to do was just play my senior year, the biggest year of my life.
Instead, a brief, albeit passionate, encounter with a female classmate in this high school stairwell changed everything.
We began making out, we kissed, groped, touched. We didn't have sex. Sex never occurred.
But the girl claimed rape, and before Brian knew it, he was under arrest.
I was awakened with a number of officers in my room. One officer had his knee to my back as I was laying down, and there were guns drawn. They threw me in a squad car, and I never came home.
There was no proof that you were guilty, no physical evidence, no DNA evidence, nothing.
Nothing whatsoever.
It was your word against hers.
Mm-hmm.
And hers won?
Hers won because mine was never heard.
Despite his claims of innocence, he says his defense attorney gave him a choice. Plead no contest to rape or risk a trial that could send him to prison for life.
If I go into that courtroom, the jury was going to automatically see a big black teenager and would automatically assume me as guilty.
That's what she told you?
That's what she told me. And so I asked her, well, can I at least speak to my mother? And she said, no, this is your decision to make. You need to make it now. And so I took the plea.
He ended up finishing high school while in prison, and he had to register as a sex offender. He thought that was the end of it. But after he was released, came a surprise, a friend request on Facebook from the girl, now a woman, who had ruined his young life.
So what went through your mind, though, when you got that Facebook message?
I didn't even think it was her. I thought it was somebody playing a joke on me.
He agreed to meet her with a private investigator who videotaped the whole thing. And finally, the confession came.
Did he rape you? No, he did not rape me.
But that's as far as it went.
Did she apologize?
No.
Not even an I'm sorry?
No.
Nothing?
No.
And she never explained why she did it. But it was enough evidence for attorneys from the Innocence Project to get Brian's conviction overturned.
As for the bit where she says, by affirming their belief in Kavanaugh's denials, they implied were false. In other words, they implied that the accusations were false. And yeah, I don't know if that's exactly accurate. I think it really depends on the senators and what they said. Now, some may have come out and said they believed Kavanaugh's account 100%, and they believed that Ford was lying, whereas others may have looked at it from the viewpoint that there's no evidence to support the claims. Now, just because there's no evidence for a claim, that doesn't mean the claim isn't necessarily false. But we have this thing called innocent until proven guilty. You may have heard of it. So if you can't prove that Kavanaugh did in fact rape someone, then he is to be treated as if innocent. This is the cornerstone of our legal system. And I would assume that a lot of senators who voted for Kavanaugh voted for him on that simple principle. Anyway, let's continue. In an editorial for the New York Times, opinion columnist Bret Stephens, after misinterpreting a statistic regarding the prevalence of false rape allegations. Now, she goes on to give us a quote from Bret Stephens, which I'll look at in a minute. But first, I want to deal with the claim that Bret Stephens has somehow misrepresented some statistics. And she actually goes and explains her reasoning a little bit later on in the article. So I'm going to jump ahead to that, then I'll come back to the quote. She says, how do false rape report rates compare to false reports of other crimes? In his column, Stephens shared a misrepresented statistic stating that false rape allegations are at least 5 times as common as false accusations of other types of crime. However, even the abstract from the very study he links to presents a more complicated figure. The authors write that a 5% false rape figure, which again is a misleading figure to begin with, we'll come back to that in a minute, is at least 5 times higher than for most other offence types. Most, but not all, as Stephens implies. So her big gotcha moment is that false rape claims are only 5 times as common for most crimes, but not all crimes. Yeah, I don't know if that really makes a good case for you for your argument. But you know what? I'm happy to say you're correct. If you want to make the argument that false rape claims are 5 times as common for most other crimes when it comes to false allegations, yeah, I'm happy to go with that. That really doesn't make a strong argument for your case, though. It's not a very good gotcha moment. What she doesn't also mention is that the abstract claims that researchers who conducted the other studies reported prevalence rates varying from 3 to 90%, which is a massive range. In other words, we don't really know, do we? As I said earlier, it's almost impossible to determine in most cases whether the claim is true or false. So in most cases, we simply don't know. So yeah, it could be 3%, it could be 90%. And I would guess that that figure changes from region to region depending on a lot of different factors as well. None of which she'll mention or bring up in this article, of course. But anyway, let's go back to those quotes from Bret Stephens' article. She quotes him saying, falsely accusing a person of sexual assault is nearly as despicable as sexual assault itself. Well, I would have to say it can be. It really depends on the circumstances. I guess it depends on how the accusation is handled, who it's made against, what the results are, what the ramifications are. I would even go as far as to argue, in some cases, a false allegation can be worse than sexual assault or rape. And the reason why I say that is, I'm pretty fucking sure there are falsely accused men who have gone to jail and been sexually assaulted or raped repeatedly. Now, I don't know how common that is, but I'm sure that it has happened at least on some occasions. And I would say being imprisoned and raped on numerous occasions is worse than being raped once. Anyway, she continues with the quote. It inflicts psychic, familial, reputational, and professional harms that can last a lifetime. This is nothing to sneer at. And yeah, I would agree with him. I would definitely agree that that is accurate.
Freedom, I gotta put the freedom on.
Yes! 2 men have finally reached the end of a long road to proving their innocence.
It's like a torture I went through, and I know I'm sitting in jail for something I didn't do.
In 1991, 19-year-old Gregory Counts and 21-year-old Van Dyke Perry were arrested for crimes they say they didn't commit.
These two men were convicted of kidnapping, rape, and sodomy because of the testimony of a complainant who recanted her accusations just 2 weeks ago.
Almost 3 decades later, prosecutors say the woman now claims she made up the allegations because her boyfriend owed the men a debt. Counts was released on parole in August after he served 27 years. Perry served 12 years and moved to Washington State to start over, where he now owns his own business and has a wife and 6 children.
I got a good life now. It was kind of hard, man. It was real hard, man.
The Innocence Project claims law enforcement failed to fully investigate the case because DNA found on the victim's underwear didn't match either of the men. While the criminal case is over, these men say the experience will be with them forever.
It's never going to be over. The reason why, because it tormented my life and it's my past.
The article continues, but how common are false rape allegations really? What constitutes false, and what evidence is there for psychic, familial, reputational and professional harm suffered by those people on the other end of those accusations? The Cut spoke to Joanne Belknap, a sociologist, criminologist and professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, and to Sandra Newman, a novelist with extensive research expertise in false rape allegations. Yes, I'm sure they're both very, very impartial, right? We'll see exactly how impartial they are as we go through this article. Now, she has a citation here to an article by Sandra Newman. I may go through this later on in this video or in another video, depending on time, because there are some very interesting things in that article. But for now, let's continue with the article from The Cut. How common are false allegations of rape or sexual assault? One commonly cited figure holds that 5% of rape allegations are bound to be false. But that figure paints a very incomplete picture, says Belknap. Typically, this figure comes from studies done on college students, an estimated 95% of whom do not report their assaults to police. 95%. That's interesting. I think that figure might be just a little bit too high, unless you believe that, the majority of women on college campuses are being raped. Actually, using that figure, probably all of them are being raped. I don't know if that's too accurate. Call me skeptical. The article continues. Overall, an estimated 8 to 10% of women are thought to report their rapes to the police, which means that at very highest, we can infer that 90% of rapes go unreported, says Belknap. Yeah, once again, I find this figure a little bit hard to believe. Now we get to the interesting part. Obviously, only those rapes that are reported in the first place can be considered falsely reported. Yeah, that would make sense, wouldn't it? I mean, if something isn't reported, then it can't be falsely reported. Yeah. She continues. So that 5% figure only applies to 10% at most of rapes that occur. This puts the actual false allegation figure closer to 0.005%, i.e. 5% of 10%, says Belknap. Well, that's a very convenient way to water down some figures, isn't it? Now, to use my analogy of a plane crash and how common it is for people to die in a plane crash, if we were to include people who have never flown in planes before, would that be an accurate representation of how safe it is to fly in a plane? Of course not. If you want to examine how safe it is to fly in a plane, then you would examine actual planes who have taken off with actual passengers and determine how many of those passengers have actually died. You don't water down the figure by including people who have never flown. That's insanity. That's bullshit, right? So clearly, when we're talking about false allegations, that's in reference to rapes that have actually been reported. And including unreported rapes, and they admit that there's no actual concrete figure to go with regarding that, but including unreported rapes is just a bullshit way to water down the number of actual false allegations. And of course, this is only including allegations made to police. It doesn't include the numerous allegations made on social media these days, which are extremely common. And what about all these students kicked out of universities who don't have proper due process? How are you to determine which of those are actual rape cases as opposed to false allegations when you have a kangaroo court starting with the conclusion and ignoring evidence and due process? But she does give us a figure of 5%, which is 1 in 20. Now, let me ask you a question. Is 1 in 20 almost no one is falsely accused of rape? 1 in 20 sounds a little bit more common than almost no one. To use the plane analogy again, if 1 in 20 people were dying in plane crashes, you wouldn't say almost no one who flies in a plane dies in a plane crash. It goes on to say, of course these figures are estimates, and Belknap doesn't doubt they're imperfect. Yeah, I would guess that they're pretty fucking imperfect. If you're saying 95% of rapes on college campuses go unreported, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's inaccurate. We can't count what isn't being counted, yet strangely that's exactly what you're doing. But her research suggests that, if anything, we underestimate the number of rapes that go unreported. Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. Let's continue. Why might a rape allegation be deemed false? Though false accusation is often used synonymously with made-up accusation, there are many factors that might result in an allegation being deemed false. One is that women who initially made the accusation chooses to recant it, which doesn't necessarily mean that she was lying. If you don't want to go through a police investigation for any reason, and there are many, many reasons why you might not want to, it's really traumatizing, then the easiest and quickest way to get out of it is to recant and say, "You were lying," says Newman. Yeah, I don't believe that for a fucking second. Okay, if you don't want to go through the court system, which is understandable, and we'll look at some statistics in a second regarding that, you're not going to say you made it up and it's false. Now, it is true, a lot of people don't want to go through the court system, and I can understand why. It's not an easy process to go through. I can understand it would be traumatic, especially after being raped. And I fully understand exactly why a lot of people drop their cases. In fact, going back to those English statistics I looked at earlier, 34% of victims withdrew their allegation. Now, you'll note here that victim withdrawal is a separate category from false allegation. So just because someone withdraws their complaint, it doesn't mean it's automatically classed as a false allegation. So let's look at some of the reasons why people might withdraw their cases. 20% do not want to go through with it. Like I said, perfectly understandable. 20% want to move on. Once again, that's perfectly understandable. Impact on friends, relatives, victims' well-being. Yep, understandable. 10% pressure from others. 10% concern over impact on suspect. That's interesting. I don't know why someone would be concerned over the impact on a suspect if that person is actually guilty. I guess maybe they're related to the person or possibly in a relationship with them or something, and they might have some emotional connection to them. If I was to speculate, that would be my guess. 8% other. 6% refusal to cooperate. That's an interesting one. 5% fear concerns for reprisal. 4% doubtful of successful court outcome. 3% victim no longer believes crime took place. Now that's a very interesting statistic. Why would a victim no longer believe that a rape took place? That's very interesting. And 2% just wanted police to talk to suspect. That's a strange one. If you've been raped by someone, why would you want the police just to talk to them? Wouldn't you want them in jail? Strange. Now, I would suggest that out of this 34%, there would be a percentage, and I have no idea what percentage that would be, but I imagine there would be a percentage of people who have made a false allegation, have decided that they shouldn't have done it and are feeling guilty, and have decided to drop the case. Maybe they've done it for revenge, or they're angry at their partner or ex-partner or whatever, and then afterwards they've felt guilty about it and decided to drop the case. But it hasn't been investigated, and therefore it hasn't been determined as a false allegation to begin with. You could also argue that there might also be a percentage of false allegations under reason unknown and no evidence of assault. Now, of course, just because there's no evidence of an assault doesn't mean that an assault didn't take place. Often people report rapes well after they've happened, sometimes 36 years after it's happened, supposedly. But if there's no evidence of an assault, it might also indicate that there is no assault, or there was no assault to begin with. So I think 12% is a starting point. I would suggest it's somewhat higher than that. How much higher? I have no idea. And anyone who claims that they know for sure is full of shit, because most cases are fucking unknown. They don't have evidence one way or the other. And we're really just dealing with guesswork at best. I mean, what do you expect when studies suggest false allegations are somewhere between 3% and 90%? That's not really pinpointing the percentage, is it? But the point is, the author of this article is incorrect when she suggests that if someone drops the case, it's classed as a false allegation. And I don't know why someone would come out and say that they're lying when they're not. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Hi. All right, so honestly, I'm torn right now, and I don't know whether or not I believe you guys. And apparently this video is what's going to save you. But you said you took it on a phone, so how long did the video last? 40 seconds, 50 seconds? Who's to say that those two guys that were having sex with her, 4 more didn't join in? Like how...
If it was a lie, we wouldn't be here right now.
The girl has recanted the story.
The story.
She said, she admitted that she didn't want her boyfriend to find out. And that's why she made up the story.
Maybe she's scared that if she says that she was raped,
how
that's something bad.
Wait. How scared is she than us? We was doing 25 years, so how much scared of she can be with us? We do 25 years, so what are we scared about?
Now, imagine there is a very popular restaurant in your local city, and one week you see a news report that a lot of people have been rushed to the hospital because of a food poisoning outbreak. And it turns out that all these people have eaten at this very popular restaurant. It seems that the person in charge wanted to save a few bucks and has been serving expired food. Now, the people who got sick, many of them had to spend weeks in the hospital recovering, and some of them even died. Now, imagine someone comes out and says, well, you know, it's not really that big an issue because, well, there are 7.7 billion people in the world, and very, very few of them died from eating food at this restaurant. In fact, people have been eating food at this restaurant for years, and the vast majority of them didn't die. In fact, if we take into account the starving people in the third world who have never died from eating food at this restaurant, it's really not that much of a concern. In fact, what we should do is we should strip away any laws around the safe handling of food, because clearly it's not an issue. Clearly we shouldn't be concerned about restaurants that serve bad food because, you know, hardly anyone has ever died of botulism. Don't you think that would be an incredibly bad argument? And what do you think would happen if those laws were stripped away? And suddenly there were no consequences for restaurants that served bad food and cut corners and didn't really care about the well-being of their customers. Do you think the rate of people getting sick might increase? Do you think in the long term more people might be dying? And that's essentially what we're seeing here. We're seeing feminists like the one that wrote this article minimizing the actual impact of false allegations and then demanding that, we really strip away due process rights because apparently they're not really needed. All we need to do is to believe the accuser, provided that she's a woman, of course. And we don't really need anything. Court cases and investigations and asking for evidence, that's all just a big hassle, really. Who really needs that? We just believe the victim, provided she's female, of course. And it's much easier that way. And I'm sure the number of false allegations won't increase over time. Of course not. But the fact is that false allegations range somewhere between 2 and 90%. Probably more likely around 12 to 15%. Which is a pretty high figure, which means there's a fucking issue here that we need to talk about. And that's not even taking into account what's happening on college campuses or accusations made in social media, none of which go anywhere near actual due process and legal representation and legal rights and everything to do with that. And these accusations with no evidence apart from the accusation itself has resulted in numerous people losing their jobs, many of which seem to be male feminists. Now, I don't know if that is representative of male feminists being more likely to commit sexual assault and rape, or possibly female feminists more likely to make false accusations. Who knows? We don't know because these claims haven't been properly investigated, have they? Anyway, I've still got a fair bit of article to get through, and I'll leave that till part 2, so I'll see you then.
For several days, many found it plausible that on Friday night in the fall of 2012 in Charlottesville, Virginia, UVA fraternity members engaged in a nightmarish, ritualized 3-hour gang rape of one of their classmates. And this account in the Rolling Stone included sadistic details. The whole story was reminiscent of horrors of a Bosnian or Congolese rape camp. In retrospect, the story should have aroused immediate suspicion. That it was instead widely credited cries out for explanation. Well, here's mine. Since the 1970s, many academic feminists have claimed that American women live in a state of siege, constantly harassed, humiliated, and battered by men. Rape, they claim, is not only pervasive, but it is supported and sustained by cultural norms. Thus the term rape culture. Well, this grim worldview has little currency outside esoteric feminist circles. Until recently, public perception began to change around 2010, and the term rape culture began to find its way into the mainstream.
I'm really furious at the culture of rape.
And everywhere, we heard that 1/5 of college women will be sexually assaulted.
It is estimated that 1 in 5 women on college campuses has been sexually assaulted during their time there. 1 in 5.
Well, the college rape epidemic meme went viral at the same time that rates of violent crime, including rape, were falling dramatically. And new data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics shows that the rate of rape or sexual assault for college women, these rates are low and have been dramatically decreasing. Well, what happened in 2010 that precipitated this media blitz? Well, that year, the Center for Public Integrity, a left-leaning institution that promotes socially conscious investigative journalism, they teamed up with reporters at NPR to produce a massive 104-page study describing a hidden epidemic of rape on campus. Now, campus sexual assault is a genuine and serious problem, but this report made it seem like the nation's colleges were just overrun with rapists and that the officials were coddling them. According to the report, not only were the vast numbers of young women being raped by their male classmates, but when they reported the crime to campus officials, they were re-victimized by counselors and deans who created a hostile environment for them. Now, the report is the worst kind of advocacy research. It's full of anecdotes and misleading statistics. It's predicated on the claim that 1 in 5 female students can expect to be a victim of rape or attempted rape. I mean, these investigative journalists never thought to investigate what serious researchers and criminologists have exposed as a specious statistic. Now, the report included 33 women's personal stories of campus rape, and they were sad and disturbing. But many of these stories were classic he said, she said cases that are notoriously difficult to resolve, especially months after the event. The report deplores the fact that when women make complaints, they are faced with a litany of barriers. But how can barriers be avoided if someone is accusing another person of a serious crime? Well, when the NPR Public Integrity Team confronted the Office of Civil Rights with its findings of a rampant sexual violence epidemic and university complicity, this new person in charge, Ruslan Ali, Assistant Secretary of Education, she promised action.
We will use all of the tools at our disposal, including referring to justice or withholding federal funds to ensure that women are free from sexual violence.
Now, the Center of Public Integrity boasted about the impact it was having in its fundraising materials. And Secretary Ali made good on her word. On April 4th, 2011, she sent out her now famous Dear Colleague letter to colleges across the nation, providing detailed guidelines and new draconian steps that colleges should have to take to fight what she called a plague of sexual harassment and sexual violence. Now, her letter advised schools to determine guilt by the lowest standard, a preponderance of evidence, and it instructed them to take measures to minimize the burdens of complainants. Not a word about the rights of those accused of terrible crimes. Well, colleges rushed to meet the new requirements. Political leaders joined the fray, and there was suddenly a dizzying number of sexual assault task forces, listening sessions, toolkits, commission reports. They quickly materialized. And universities revamped their disciplinary committees and hired trauma counselors and Title IX coordinators to cope with this exploding number of rape survivors and perpetrators. By 2014, the 1 in 5 statistic was everywhere, and campuses were in full panic mode, with calls for censorship and trigger warnings and a growing list of young men facing harsh justice in campus kangaroo courts. Well, a few brave skeptics came forward and questioned the whole thing, but they were quickly denounced as rape apologists. George Will, for example. He was summarily denounced and even disinvited from a campus appearance. By the time the Rolling Stone story appeared, many saw it as horrific, but as a badly needed illustration of a routine occurrence in the college rape culture. Except that it didn't appear to be an illustration of anything factual. It was a male-demonizing Gothic fantasy nurtured by several decades of hardline feminist theory. The writers and editors of Rolling Stone are to blame for publishing the story, but it was NPR and the Center for Public Integrity, as well as the Office of Civil Rights, who made it all seem so plausible.